Little girl points at homeless child. Millionaire dad breaks down. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, and the sky above the city hung in soft amber hues as the sun began to retreat behind tall office buildings. Inside a sleek black SUV, everything was still. Too still. Richard Blake, a man whose name carried weight in boardrooms and across stock markets, sat behind the wheel, his mind buried in a blur of business deals and unread messages. His sharply tailored suit, the soft jazz playing from the dashboard, the scent of expensive leather, it all created a bubble far removed from the world outside. In the back seat, his daughter Lily, just 6 years old, sat in her seat with her favorite stuffed bear nestled tightly in her arms. She had just come from a grand birthday party, one filled with glitter, cupcakes, and bouncing castles, yet her face didn't hold the excitement most kids wore after such events. Her gaze was fixed outside the window, watching the city blur past with a quiet curiosity. The world outside moved fast. Cars zoomed by, people crossed streets in a rush, neon signs blinked with urgency, but Lily wasn't watching the lights or the speed. She was looking deeper, slower, quieter. Richard, meanwhile, had only half his mind on the road. The other half was in Tokyo, where a major investor awaited his decision. His phone buzzed in the console beside him, but he didn't reach for it. His fingers tapped lightly on the steering wheel, lost in silent rhythm. As the car slowed to a stop at a red light, Lily leaned slightly forward, her eyes wide, but her lips closed, still hugging the bear close to her chest. Then came her voice, soft, innocent, and clear enough to slice through the silence like a whisper in a cathedral. "Daddy, that girl has no shoes." Richard blinked and turned his head slightly, confused for a second. Then followed Lily's eyes through the glass. There's across the street, beneath a worn and flickering street lamp, sat a little girl. She was alone, sitting on a piece of torn cardboard as if it were the only thing keeping her from sinking into the pavement. Her dress was once pink, perhaps a birthday dress long forgotten, now dirt-stained and clinging to her frail body. Her feet were bare, cracked with cold, pressed against the concrete. Her arms were wrapped tightly around her knees, and her head hung low, strands of messy hair falling like curtains across her face. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She just sat there, quietly enduring a world that seemed to have no place for her. People passed her, businessmen in suits, women with shopping bags, teenagers with earbuds in. But no one looked. No one paused. No one saw her like Lily did. A man walking by tossed a few coins into a crumpled paper cup beside her, not even slowing his step. The world spun forward, indifferent. Richard stared at the girl. For a brief moment, everything else ceased to matter. The traffic, the emails, the meetings stacked in his calendar. There was only that child. The light turned green. The car behind him gave a quick honk. Richard exhaled slowly and pressed his foot on the gas. The SUV moved forward. The girl on the sidewalk began to fade behind them, swallowed by passing cars and the shadow of buildings. But Lily turned her head. She kept looking back. Her eyes stayed locked on the spot where the girl had been, as if afraid the image might disappear from her memory. The teddy bear, once clutched with playful joy, now rested in her lap like a burden she didn't know how to release. Inside the car, the silence returned, but now it carried weight. It pressed on the walls, on the windows, on Richard's chest. He glanced into the rearview mirror. He saw Lily's face, calm but heavy, thoughtful in a way that felt far too grown up for someone her age. She didn't ask another question. She didn't speak again. She simply watched the city continue to move, even though something inside her had stopped. Richard opened his mouth as if to say something, anything, but closed it again. What could he possibly say to explain a world where little girls sit barefoot on cardboard while others ride home from parties in luxury cars? For the first time in a long time, Richard Blake, the man known for speeches, negotiations, and inspiring boardrooms, had no words to offer his daughter. only a silence that felt louder than any answer he could give. That night, the house was unusually quiet. The large dining room, usually echoing with conversation or the clinking of silverware, was filled instead with a heavy stillness. The chandelier above cast soft golden light over the table where Richard and Lily sat, their plates mostly untouched. Richard occasionally glanced up from his plate, stealing short looks at his daughter. Her fork had barely moved, the pasta on her plate growing cold, her glass of milk untouched. Her shoulders were a little hunched, her small face resting on her hand as she stared blankly at the wood grain of the table. The teddy bear, Mr. Muffins, sat on the chair beside her, leaning to one side like a quiet witness. Richard cleared his throat once, twice, hoping she might look up, say something, ask for dessert maybe, or share a silly story from the party, but she didn't, and he didn't know how to begin. After a few more awkward minutes, he quietly stood and walked around the table, placing his hand gently on her back. "Are you tired, sweetheart?" he asked softly. She gave a slow nod without words. "Come on then," he said, lifting her gently into his arms. As he carried her up the grand staircase, past paintings and polished furniture, he felt the weight of her little body against his chest, but also something heavier in her silence. In her room, he tucked her into bed, pulling the soft quilt up to her chin. Her stuffed bear joined her under the blanket, and she curled to it, but not with the usual comfort. Her eyes stayed open, fixed on the ceiling fan spinning above. Richard sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing her hair back gently. The silence stretched again, but this time he waited. Finally, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, she spoke. "Daddy?" He leaned in closer. "Yes, baby?" Her eyes turned to meet his, shimmering in the low light. "Why didn't we help her?" The question came with no anger, no blame, just a raw and honest confusion that pierced right through him. He blinked, unprepared for the ache that bloomed in his chest. He started, but no words came. Lily wasn't finished. Her voice cracked as she asked, "If I lost my shoes and sat outside, would someone just drive away from me too?" Richard's heart nearly stopped. Time seemed to pause. In that single moment, the weight of everything he had ever done, every business deal, every speech on generosity, every donation made in public view, felt like paper in a storm. What good were his riches if they failed him when it mattered most? The little girl on the street wasn't a number in a file or a statistic in a charity report. She was real, and he had driven away. He swallowed hard, tears stinging the corners of his eyes. He reached out and pulled Lily into his arms, holding her tightly. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "You're right. I should have stopped. I should have helped her." Lily clung to him, burying her face into his chest. "She looked so cold," she murmured. Richard closed his eyes, the image flashing again in his mind, the bare feet, the quiet, the way she didn't even lift her head. "I saw her too," he said gently, "and I didn't know what to do. But that doesn't make it okay." Lily was quiet for a long time, her breath slowly evening out, though he could still feel the dampness of a few tears on his shirt. He lay back on the bed beside her, the two of Tion, Hem staring at the ceiling now, just like she had been moments before. The room was filled with shadows from the moonlight peeking through the curtains, and in that pale blue light, Richard felt something shift inside him, not just guilt, but clarity. This wasn't about guilt, it was about responsibility, about the eyes that were watching him, learning from him, growing beside him. He turned his head and looked at Lily, her face now softened in sleep, her hand still clutching his finger. His throat tightened. She had asked the question he had been too afraid to ask himself, not just why they didn't help, but why it had become so normal not to. He stayed there beside her long after she drifted off, his mind no longer racing with meetings or deadlines, but with one quiet, unshakable promise. This was not going to be the end of that story. Morning light filtered gently through Lily's curtains, painting soft golden stripes across the floor. Richard had barely slept, but he was already dressed, sitting on the edge of her bed before her alarm even buzzed. When she stirred and rubbed her sleepy eyes, he leaned down and kissed her forehead. "We're going to find her," he said simply. Lily's eyes widened, not with confusion, but with hope. She nodded without a word. An hour later, they were in the car, Lily clutching Mr. Muffins close once more, this time with a different kind of determination. The usual suit and tie Richard was gone. He wore jeans and an old hoodie, and his phone was tucked deep in the glove box, silenced and forgotten. The city buzzed around them as they retraced their path, past the same light where they had stopped, past the same lamppost and sidewalk that now seemed so much heavier with memory. But the girl was gone. The cardboard square had been blown away by the wind, and the space she once sat in was empty, as if she had never existed. Richard didn't give up. They circled the block, then another. He stopped the car and walked on foot, holding Lily's hand tightly as they scanned the streets, peered into alleys, checked near benches, behin, trash bins, anywhere a child might go to disappear. Some people shook their heads when he asked, others shrugged, but most didn't even stop. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, and Lily's face began to droop with disappointment, but she never complained. Her little feet kept moving, her eyes kept searching. Then, as they walked past a quiet side street near an old bakery, Lily tugged on Richard's sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, pointing ahead. There, huddled over a metal grate that puffed out weak, warm air from underground, was the same little girl. Her knees were pulled tight against her chest, her hands hovering inches above the vent, trembling from the cold. Her dress looked thinner now, more torn at the edges. Her face was pale, lips cracked, eyes dull. Richard stopped in his tracks. For a second, he didn't move, didn't even breathe. Then he reached for Lily's hand, but she had already let go. Before he could say a word, she was walking toward the girl with slow, careful steps. The girl looked up, startled. Her body tensed, ready to bolt like a frightened animal. Her eyes darted between Lily and Richard, unsure if they were danger or safety. But Lily knelt beside her without hesitation, her small arms reaching out as she gently placed Mr. Muffins around the girl's shoulders. "You can have her," Lily said softly. "She keeps me warm." The girl froze. Her lips parted slightly, as if she didn't understand what was happening. Her eyes filled with tears almost instantly, spilling down her cheeks silently, like they had been waiting for permission to fall. Mr. Muffins, dirtied, loved, patched and worn, sat nestled in her lap, warmer than the vent below. Richard stepped forward slowly, his heart aching in his chest. The girl looked up again, face flushed with emotion, eyes wide with fear and confusion. But Richard didn't speak right away. He knelt down, lowering himself to her level, and reached out a trembling hand, not to grab or lead, but simply to show he was there. "I'm sorry I didn't stop yesterday," he said, his voice cracked and soft, barely holding together. "But we're here now, and we're not leaving without you." The girl sobbed, not loudly, not with screams, but with a broken, quiet gasp that echoed more than any words. Richard's tears began to fall too, wetting his cheeks and dripping onto the pavement below. He didn't wipe them away, he just held his hand out. Lily sat beside the girl, now Emma, they would learn, and gently touched her arm. For the first time in hours, for the first time in days, the girl reached back. Not fully, not confidently, but enough to change everything. And there, on a cold city sidewalk, under the scent of fresh bread and passing strangers, something finally began to heal. Emma's tiny fingers rested loosely in Lily's as the car pulled away from the cold street. Wrapped in a blanket and holding Mr. Muffins close, she sat between Richard and his daughter in the back seat, her eyes shifting between fear and wonder, uncertain whether this kindness was real or just a passing dream. Richard didn't speak much on the way, afraid that words might break whatever delicate trust was beginning to form. but his eyes met Emma's in the mirror once, and that quiet exchange held more meaning than 1,000 apologies. By the next afternoon, Richard had already set the wheels in motion. He didn't delegate it to an assistant or hand it off to a foundation. This was personal. He visited shelters across the city, showed Emma's photo, described her soft features and scared eyes. At the third place, a dim, overburdened facility tucked between warehouse lots, he found her mother, frail, exhausted, and wrapped in a donated coat far too large for her small frame. Her name was Grace. She had once worked as a receptionist until an illness forced her to choose between medicine or rent. She had chosen her daughter. As soon as she saw Emma in Richard's car, alive and safe, she collapsed into sobs, clutching her child to her chest like she might disappear again. Richard didn't ask for explanations. He simply took them both home. Not to a hotel, not to a temporary shelter, but to one of his guest houses, a warm cottage tucked behind his main estate, with a garden, bright windows, and a kitchen that smelled of cinnamon and hope. Within a week, Grace had seen a doctor and started treatment. A tutor began visiting Emma daily, teaching her letters, numbers, and slowly rebuilding the pieces of her childhood. And Lily became her best friend, her shadow, her joy. The two girls played in the yard every afternoon, drawing chalk murals on the stone path, having tea parties beneath the oak tree, giggling over whispered secrets in pillow forts. The house, once silent, now echoed with laughter. Richard often watched them from the porch, coffee in hand, a soft smile on his face. He had never known this kind of wealth before, not the kind that could be counted, but the kind that could be felt in the heart. Months passed and the seasons shifted gently, from summer warmth to autumn chill. One evening, as orange leaves danced through the garden and fairy lights twinkled in the trees, Richard stood on stage at a charity gala hosted by his own foundation. The room was filled with people in black suits and shimmering dresses, wine glasses clinking, quiet jazz humming in the background. But when Richard stepped to the microphone, the room hushed. He looked out at the crowd, then down at the two little girls seated in the front row, Lily and Emma, dressed in matching pale blue gowns, their hands still clasped. His voice, calm but thick with emotion, filled the hall. "I've spent years believing that my success came from what I built. My businesses, my brand, my name," he said. "But none of that mattered the day my daughter asked me a simple question I couldn't answer." The audience leaned in, listening. "We all say we care. We all give when it's convenient. But it wasn't my wealth that made a difference," he continued. "It was my daughter's heart." His gaze settled on Lily, whose eyes shimmered with pride. "She reminded me that being rich means nothing, unless your heart is rich too." Silence stretched for a long moment, heavy but beautiful. Then someone clapped, and then another. And suddenly the entire hall erupted in applause. Not polite, not staged, but real and full of tears. In that moment, a room full of powerful people didn't just hear a speech. They felt something shift inside them. Richard stepped down from the stage and joined the two girls, kneeling beside them with tears in his eyes. He didn't need cameras or headlines. He had already witnessed the miracle. A child's question, a moment of silence, a decision to turn around. That's all it had taken. What began on a quiet Sunday with a glance out the window had become a ripple that touched lives far beyond what he could count. That night, as Lily and Emma danced barefoot under the twinkle lights, giggling and twirling like stars come to life, Richard stood beside Grace and smiled. This wasn't just a second chance for Emma, it was a new beginning for all of them. And deep in his heart, he knew he would never drive past someone in need again,